Here we go with Chapter 3. He had never met Butch face to face, but the clown had already placed him near the top of his list. When your head is burning, you're in excruciating pain. He wasn't going to put up with anyone joking about it. No dignity in that. Kills the fear. He had been told that there would be steak. The clown didn't get steak. He had been given a great big slab of frozen beef and a little snowy pile of frozen peas, finished off with a glass of ice. The guard told him Butch said he was perfectly equipped to cook the steak. His intense scowl was hidden behind his monstrous clown mask. At the moment, he had no way of eating the damned steak. A man's head can't always be on fire, you know, and even if it was, he sure as hell wasn't going to make a barbecue on top of his fucking head. He said nothing to the guard. As he glared at him, he was forming a mental image of the young man being made to fit through the slot in the door. It would take a bit of work, but he figured that in the unlikely event he was ever let out of solitary, he might be able to make the necessary adjustments to the sissy man's body with the hard edges of the handcuffs. His arms were skinny enough. Maybe he'd only have to cut them at the shoulders. The thought was fascinating. He kept reflecting on that thought as the guard walked away, and after a minute or two he put his food tray down on the ground and began to hold the beef slab up to the top right corner of the door. The hinges were on the other side. He stood there with his hand held up to the slab for a while, and he started to give the palm of his hand a mild case of frostbite. Suddenly the clown swore loud. It occurred to him that he was doing this in the wrong order. He put the meat down on the tray and slid it over to the other end of the room. He would have to wait. He would need to flare up real soon, or the food would get too cold for it. It had only been a few hours since the doctors had... His scalp flared right up as if on cue. Little burning flecks of skin floated down in front of his eyes. Thankfully, he couldn't feel a thing. The meds were supposed to alleviate the intense chemical imbalances in the patient's brain. Well, boys and girls, he thought, turns out there's nothing wrong with my brain. I just like killing people, but thanks anyway for the drugs. They're great painkillers. The thought was silly. The iron of it poked him in the belly, and he started to laugh. He pressed the crown of his head against the corner of the door. He held it there for a little while, and started to feel a little drowsy. The clown drifted off into a pleasant sleep, and was filled with somnolent nostalgia as he cruised down memory lane. A happy family in a clean white house, sitting down to eat a chicken dinner in a modern kitchen. The epitome of the American dream. He was watching through a hole in the basement door. He had to try very hard to keep from giggling. It was almost too exciting for him to handle. A husband, a wife, 2 teenage boys, and a bouncing little baby girl. They all held hands and said grace and started to eat. The father had started to talk about his work at the office that day, and his wife was listening intently as their children enjoyed the meal. The father just kept yammering for God only knows how long, and then had a small coughing fit. His wife asked him if he was okay, and he gave her a quick thumbs up and a nod while he was trying to catch his breath. He kept it under control for a minute, but then it came back. His face was turning red. His wife told him to drink something. He poured himself a tall glass of ice water and took a big swig, but ended up blasting it out his mouth and nose, making a mess all over his shirt. The baby started to cough too. One of the boys picked her up and tried to burp her. She did burp, but quickly started coughing again. The boy had to clear his throat. He had to do it again. His brother had to run to the bathroom. His mother had begun to cough, and rustled nervously through the medicine basket on the counter. His father walked up next to her and vomited in the sink. The boy began to panic. He wanted to yell but could only manage to gag. The baby was trying to cry, with the same result. He put his sister down in her high chair and ran for the telephone. He picked it up and dialed 911. Nothing happened. It took him a moment before he realized the cord was cut. He choked on the F word. They all looked like trapped mice to the hidden clown. He had never taken this approach, and it was exhilarating. The pain and fear, and nobody had any idea of foul play but that one bastard kid. It would do the kid no good, though. There was enough poison in them now to kill them all 6 more times. The baby was the first one to die. The mother went to her, crying and screaming and begging God not to let this happen. Her husband died about a minute later. He was slumped over on the floor next to the high chair in the arms of his wife. His face was dark purple. His sons had gone out the back door to get help. The puke-stained one felt that he was going to hurl again and ran back inside to find that his mother had died too. He then vomited up more blood than he would have guessed was in his body and fell to his knees. The last one, the boy who tried to make the call, staggered in to pull his brother away. They had to get out. But he spent the last of his strength and died on his brother's back. He slid off of his brother's back, and both corpses fell face forward to the ground. Nobody survived. The clown was laughing raucously at the grim spectacle. The poison had eaten away the lining of their veins, and they had choked to death on their own blood. It was one of his proudest achievements, but it wasn't over. He stood up and opened the door. He pressed his fingers against each of their necks. Their blood was still moving, but their hearts had stopped beating. He knew it would come soon. He had read that it would come soon, and he had determined to wait until it came. It looked like a nativity scene. The little girl in the high chair is Jesus, Mary and Joseph next to the child kneeling together, and 2 shepherds prostrated in worship. And finally it came. It was hard to tell at first, but the redness became more pronounced. Red patches had formed all over their dead bodies. Their pores had opened, and were now tiny pinpricks of red on their faces. Their skin had become like a colander, and their blood slowly drained out. They bled thickly from the eyes, and the whole family wept tears of blood for their fates. The clown couldn't laugh. Rather, he cried, not for remorse or grief. He wasn't capable of that. He cried because of beauty. His mind went numb with it. He was entranced, enchanted, and his heart was filled with the beauty of the evil. It was the Bloody Nativity, the birth of death, an artistic expression of beautiful evil, and an evil expression of beautiful art. It was his masterpiece. Where some hear beauty in the sound of a bow and a violin, the clown could find beauty in the sounds of final screams and the passionate scarlet red of blood. Death, pain, and hatred were truly forms of art. Every time he killed someone, it was a powerful lifting of the spirit, an exhilarating high, and his hateful scowl was his expression of blissful happiness. He was blissfully, joyfully evil. The clown had a sweet tooth for destruction, and he would gorge himself on it. He had totally and fully devoted himself to death. He had become the sweet tooth, and he loved it. He had ceased to be a man. The name of this creature was no longer man. The creature proclaimed before God and his host that he was Sweet Tooth. The creature had fulfilled his purpose 3 months ago, hiding in that basement. All the corpses and the grief and sadness he had brought upon other people were mere child's play next to his bloody nativity. The clown's trip down memory lane soured. It was the beauty that silenced the artist. One of the kids had called 911 before they came back inside. Police cars filled the block. He never had a chance. He had been tried, convicted, and sentenced. He had been sentenced to... The dreams faded away into the dull pain that filled his head, and he awoke. The meds had worn off. As it dawned on him what had just happened, he was thankful that he hadn't fallen over. The corner of the door was a dim red. He went over and grabbed the beef slab. Still frozen. He breathed a sigh of relief. He pressed it into the glowing hot metal, and steam rushed up to the ceiling. He pressed long and hard until the beef eventually thawed. The hinges would be as weak as twigs. He walked over to the opposite end of the cell, and sat there for a while, saving his energy. Sweet Tooth had been deprived of beauty for 3 months. It would be waiting on the other side of that door. A whole world of beauty was out there, and he dashed as fast and as hard as he could. The hinge snapped like a twig. It was time to make some magic.